I was going to say, what is capitalism? uh, that's the first step of that question, I guess. I mean, capitalism is a way of organizing workers and their tools to produce the stuff that other people want to buy. And so capitalism has different strains or different variants, we can say now, in an age of pandemic in different countries. So American capitalism looks very different from British capitalism, even though the two are often grouped together under Anglo-Saxon capitalism, where there is this kind of Washington consensus driven assumption that markets do things most efficiently and usually get things right. And so the more that you can just let markets work, the better your economy is going to be. So I was just explaining that American and British capitalism are often considered the most similar, but there are significant differences between the two of them as well. And then there are differences between Anglo-Saxon capitalism and European capitalism, for example, whereby Anglo-Saxon capitalism really believes that markets are the most efficient. And if they're losers, then that's too bad because markets allocate capital and other goods and services and inputs the best. In Europe, that's not the view. There's a view that actually we should look out for winners and losers and consider that in our version of capitalism. So for example, in Germany, part of the boards are workers of companies to make sure that workers have some kind of say in top level decisions and that boosts their worker power. So I'd say capitalism is very different in different places. And it is just as hard to define capitalism as it is socialism or any other kind of framework for thinking about how the economy is organized. I think our brand of capitalism now is being significantly questioned, though. So there was a poll that came out. It was done by Pew, Pew Research a couple of years ago. They asked millennials if they thought that capitalism worked for them, and for the first time ever, a majority said no. Which is interesting. And they preferred, in another question, they preferred socialism to capitalism. In another question, they were asked what they thought socialism meant, and it was clear they had no idea. And that they had defined it roughly as equality for all, which is not what socialism is. But it's interesting that if you take that to be the definition, a majority of millennials thought that actually capitalism was problematic because there's too much inequality. I think that's sort of the lesson you can draw, and this has been a new trend. So I think a lot of people do feel that capitalism isn't really working for them. It's left a lot of people behind. The kinds of liberal elite ideas that go along with capitalism, like globalization, haven't served everyone. And so the idea has been, well, the markets are most efficient, so just let them run. Now I think there's an increasing view that actually governments do some things fairly well and should probably step in and try to even things out a bit and also keep the markets honest. So I think we sort of assumed that markets were efficient, but that they worked. And now I think there's much more of an assumption that the markets are rigged, that it isn't just that governments establish the system, the environment in which markets work. Actually, markets and big companies are huge players with big voices because they have a lot of money behind them and they can lobby policymakers. So markets are kind of working in the environment that they set up for themselves. They're totally rigged. And so I think there's an increasing sort of acknowledgement of that and appreciation that the kind of capitalism that we have now really isn't working for everybody. And that will have social and political implications. We're already seeing some of them. You could argue Trump was an example. Brexit is an example. Populist movements across Europe could be an example, particularly with upcoming elections in, for example, France, also Italy, probably. And so, it's not just kind of fringe areas where this is becoming a problem. It's becoming a problem in big mainstream countries, and so we need to rethink the brand of capitalism that we're practicing, whichever variant of capitalism you are employing.
Um,
Yeah, it highlights the huge kind of divergence we've had between the markets and what's going on in the regular economy, off the back of the global financial crisis, but also off the back of this pandemic. And so I think that underscores this idea that the markets are kind of rigged. They're not actually efficient. Policy has actually backed them up. Central banks have made it, have provided a put so that the markets are always going to do well, because you can bet that a central bank's going to step in if there's a downturn. And at the same time, Joe Sixpack on the street is out of a job, and really struggling. I mean, there is this huge divergence, but I think that's also getting people's attention and thinking capitalism isn't really working.